Canada holds roughly 10% of the world's proven oil reserves, produces more than 60 minerals and metals, and has forests covering about 40% of its land. Yet the real story is not what Canada has, but how it turned geography into economic power. Think about this. Canada is enormous, but its population is relatively concentrated near the southern border. Many of its most valuable resources sit hundreds or thousands of kilometers away from the people who live there. Somehow, that became an advantage. Canada's natural resource sector directly and indirectly accounted for about 16% of national GDP in 2024, roughly 459 billion Canadian dollars. It also supported about 1.8 million direct and indirect jobs. But Canada does something unusual with those resources. It does not depend on one commodity. Oil, natural gas, uranium, potash, gold, aluminum, forests, freshwater and critical minerals all form different pieces of the same enormous resource economy. And here's what makes the story fascinating. Canada doesn't simply possess resources underground. It has built railways, pipelines, ports, power systems, mines, refineries and financial networks capable of moving those resources into global markets. Most people see Canada's forests, mines and oil fields as separate industries. But historically, they became connected by one bigger idea. Build a country across an enormous landscape, then connect its distant resources to customers. Long before oil became important, Canada's first major resource economy revolved around fur. In 1670, the Hudson's Bay Company received a royal charter and built trading posts across an enormous northern territory. The fur trade revealed Canada's first great economic advantage. Distance could be overcome if transportation followed the rivers and lakes. Water became a natural highway through a landscape that was otherwise extraordinarily difficult to cross. Then came a much bigger challenge: building a country from the Atlantic to the Pacific. British Columbia joined Confederation after Ottawa promised a railway connection to the west coast. The railway would become far more than transportation. On November 7, 1885, the last spike of the Canadian Pacific Railway was driven at Craigellachie, British Columbia. A transcontinental railway now connected Canada's eastern population centers with the Pacific. The railway opened a new possibility. Wheat could move east, timber could move toward cities, minerals could reach industrial centers, and settlers could move west. Canada's geography was beginning to behave like an economic network rather than an obstacle. But there was a human cost that cannot be ignored. Chinese workers played a major role in building the railway and later faced discriminatory policies, including the Chinese head tax. Canada's resource infrastructure was built through both extraordinary labor and serious injustice. Mining expanded alongside transportation. Gold, silver, nickel, copper and other discoveries attracted investment into remote regions. Towns appeared beside deposits, while rail lines and ports turned isolated mineral discoveries into commercial assets. Canada's forests created another enormous industry. Today, forests cover about 3.7 million square kilometers, around 40% of Canada's land area, and roughly 9% of the world's forests. Then there is water. Canada contains about 20% of the world's freshwater resources, although much of that water is distributed unevenly and some flows northward away from Canada's largest population centers. Abundance does not mean unlimited supply. And this is where things become truly fascinating. Canada's resources were spread across different provinces and territories, but the country kept building systems that linked them to population centers and international trade routes. The 20th century changed Canada's resource story dramatically. Oil moved from a regional commodity to a strategic national industry, especially after major discoveries in Alberta and the rapid development of the province's petroleum infrastructure. Then Canada discovered something even larger beneath Alberta: the oil sands. Today, Canada has the world's third largest proven oil reserves, with about 166 billion barrels located in Alberta's oil sands. But oil sands are not conventional oil fields. Extracting bitumen can require enormous engineering projects, specialized equipment, energy and water management. Canada had the resource, but turning it into profitable production required decades of technological development. And Canada faced another problem: getting oil to market. For years, most Canadian crude exports moved south into the United States. That created a huge market, but also a major dependence on one dominant customer. Infrastructure began changing that equation. The Trans Mountain expansion entered service in May 2024, increasing the system's capacity from about 300,000 to 890,000 barrels per day and giving Western Canadian crude greater access to Pacific markets. The effect was immediate. In 2024, Canadian crude exports to countries other than the United States reached a record 10.6 million cubic meters, helped by increased access to Pacific shipping after the pipeline expansion. Natural gas is following a similar path. In June 2025, Canada's first large-scale LNG export facility in Kitimat loaded its first cargo, opening a direct Pacific route for Canadian natural gas to global customers. That first LNG cargo mattered for another reason. Canada's Pacific coastline can connect its natural gas to Asian markets without routing shipments through the United States. Suddenly, geography that once looked remote became commercially valuable. But Canada's resource advantage goes far beyond oil and gas. In 2024, the country produced more than 60 minerals and metals worth 64.3 billion Canadian dollars. Gold alone accounted for about 16.9 billion. Canada is especially important in potash. In 2024, Canada produced nearly 25 million tons of potassium chloride, about 32.8% of global production, making it the world's largest potash producer. Potash may sound obscure, but it is critical to modern agriculture. It supplies potassium used in fertilizer, meaning Canada's mineral wealth can influence crop production far beyond North America. Uranium creates another strategic advantage. Canada was the world's second-largest uranium producer in 2024, according to Natural Resources Canada. Much of that production comes from Saskatchewan, where deposits are among the richest known anywhere. Gold adds another layer. In 2024, Canadian mines produced gold worth approximately $16.9 billion, making it the country's most valuable mineral commodity by production value. A resource associated with Canada's frontier past remains economically powerful today. Then there are diamonds. In 2024, Canada remained the world's fourth-largest producer of rough diamonds by both value and volume. But production is declining as some major mines approach the end of their operating lives. Now comes the part most viewers never see. A resource economy is really a logistics economy. The mineral underground is only the first step. Railways, highways, pipelines, electricity, ports and shipping determine whether that mineral can compete globally. Consider a mine in northern Canada. It may be hundreds of kilometers from a major city, power source or ocean port. Building the road, railway, airstrip and energy system can cost almost as much as the mine itself. That is why Canada's railway system remains so important. Freight trains move grain, lumber, metals, fuel and industrial goods across enormous distances. Canada's resource economy could not operate at today's scale without that network. Ports complete the chain. Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Montreal, Halifax and other gateways connect Canadian commodities with global shipping lanes. The resource economy is therefore not confined to remote mines. It extends all the way to the ocean. And then there is electricity. Canada's enormous hydroelectric resources have powered industries in Quebec, British Columbia, Manitoba and Newfoundland and Labrador. Cheap, reliable electricity can turn natural geography into industrial competitiveness. Quebec's aluminum industry is a powerful example. Canada has no domestic bauxite mines, yet it is the world's fourth-largest producer of primary aluminum, using imported raw material and abundant Canadian electricity to create a globally traded industrial product. This is a crucial distinction. Canada does not literally control every stage of every resource. Instead, its power comes from combining deposits, processing capacity, infrastructure, investment, regulation and access to major customers. The United States is at the center of that system. In 2025, the U.S. still received 72.5% of Canada's merchandise exports, despite Canada's growing trade with Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Geography makes the relationship unusually powerful. For energy, the dependence is even stronger. Canada has historically sent the overwhelming majority of its oil and gas exports to the United States, because pipelines naturally flow south into the world's largest neighboring energy market. But Canada has been trying to diversify. The Trans Mountain expansion opened greater Pacific access for crude, while LNG Canada opened a new route for natural gas. Suddenly, Canada can reach customers beyond the continental market more directly. Finance matters too. Mining projects require billions before revenue begins, and commodity prices can change dramatically. Canada's banks, pension funds, engineering companies and capital markets help transform geological possibilities into investable projects. Technology is becoming equally important. Autonomous mining equipment, geological imaging, remote operations, advanced drilling and digital supply chains allow companies to operate in places where traditional mining would be far more expensive. But Canada's resource system also depends on people. Mining directly employed about 438,000 people in 2024, with another 286,000 indirect jobs supported by the minerals sector. These workers operate across cities, rural communities, and remote regions. Indigenous communities are also central to the modern resource economy. Indigenous peoples accounted for about 11% of Canada's mining workforce in the 2021 census, while agreements with Indigenous communities increasingly shape how projects are developed and how benefits are shared. This changes the definition of control. In modern Canada, resource development increasingly depends on consultation, environmental regulation, Indigenous participation, provincial authority, and community support. The resource may be underground, but the decisions around it are deeply political and social. And there is a major weakness. Canada is exceptionally strong at extracting resources, but much of its export strength remains concentrated in upstream stages. In critical minerals, the country is still working to build more processing and manufacturing capacity at home. Shocking fact number 1. Canada's minerals and metals exports reached about 162 billion Canadian dollars in 2025, representing roughly 22% of the country's total merchandise exports. That is an enormous global footprint. Shocking fact number 2. Canada produced about 60 minerals and metals in 2024 from almost 200 mines and thousands of quarries. Its resource economy is not one giant industry. It is a massive portfolio of different geological bets. Shocking fact number 3. Canada exported about $49.4 billion of critical minerals in 2025. Aluminum, copper, potash, nickel, uranium, and zinc made up most of that value. These are the materials behind modern energy and industry. Critical minerals have changed the geopolitical meaning of Canadian resources. Lithium, nickel, copper, uranium, graphite, and rare earths are no longer simply commodities. They are inputs into batteries, electricity networks, advanced manufacturing, and national supply chains. That is why Canada's relationship with the United States matters so much. In 2025, Canadian mineral exports to the U.S. were worth about $76.4 billion, including iron and steel, aluminum, gold, copper, and potash. But dependence creates risk. Canada's mineral trade with the United States declined in value in 2025, while exports to Europe and other regions grew. The lesson is simple. Even a powerful trading relationship should not become the only relationship. The Arctic could become another frontier. Canada's northern territories contain significant mineral potential, but extreme weather, limited infrastructure, environmental sensitivity, and long distances make development far more difficult than in southern Canada. Climate change makes the Arctic opportunity even more complicated. Some northern routes may become more accessible, but melting ice, permafrost damage, and fragile ecosystems create new environmental and infrastructure risks. Forests face their own challenge. Canada's forest sector exported about $37.2 billion of products in 2024, but wildfires, climate pressures, pests, and changing global markets are reshaping the industry. Energy faces another transition. Oil and gas remain enormously important, but global demand is shifting toward lower carbon technologies. Canada therefore faces a difficult question. How can a resource giant profit from today's energy system while preparing for tomorrow's? The answer may be critical minerals. The global transition needs copper for grids, uranium for nuclear power, potash for food production, and metals for batteries and advanced manufacturing. Canada's resource advantage could therefore evolve rather than disappear. But ownership of minerals is no longer enough. China dominates important parts of several global mineral processing chains, while the United States and Europe are trying to build more secure alternatives. Canada now has an opportunity to become a trusted supplier beyond simply exporting raw ore. That means building more processing capacity at home. Instead of shipping concentrates overseas and buying finished products back, Canada wants a larger role in refining, processing, manufacturing, and technology. That is where much of the next economic value could be captured. Yet this will not be easy. Processing plants require capital, electricity, skilled workers, environmental approvals, and reliable customers. Canada has the raw materials, but turning that advantage into complete supply chains requires a second industrial revolution. And competition is intense. Australia, Brazil, Chile, the United States, African producers, and others possess major deposits of their own. Canada's advantage will depend not simply on what lies underground, but on how efficiently and responsibly it can bring those resources to market. So why does Canada matter so much? Because it combines something rare: Enormous land, extraordinary geology, political institutions, advanced infrastructure, capital markets, skilled workers, abundant energy and direct access to some of the world's largest economies. Canada's resource power was not created by one discovery. It was built over centuries. First through fur and waterways, then railways and mining, later oil and gas, and now critical minerals and advanced supply chains. The railway solved distance. Pipelines solved energy transportation. Ports solved global access. Hydroelectricity powered industry. Finance supplied capital. Technology made remote extraction possible. Each generation added another layer to the same resource machine. And that is why saying Canada is resource-rich is only half the story. Plenty of countries have resources. Far fewer have built the infrastructure and institutions required to turn those resources into reliable global supply. But the future may require Canada to go one step further. Instead of simply exporting the raw materials behind the modern economy, it must decide how much refining, manufacturing and technology it wants to keep inside the country. Because the next resource race will not be won simply by whoever has the biggest deposit. It may be won by whoever can connect mines, processing plants, energy, transportation, technology and customers into the most reliable supply chain. Canada already possesses many of the ingredients. It has the minerals, the forests, the energy, the water, the coastline and the engineering expertise. The challenge now is turning that natural advantage into lasting strategic power. And perhaps that is the most surprising answer. Canada does not control some of the world's richest resources simply because it has enormous territory. Its real power comes from repeatedly turning geography into infrastructure, infrastructure into trade, and trade into influence. But the story is not finished. Canada's next chapter could be written in lithium refineries, copper projects, uranium facilities, clean energy systems and Arctic mines. The resource superpower is entering an entirely different kind of competition. The next time you hear about why Canada controls some of the world's richest resources, remember that the story is far more complex than it appears on the surface. Behind every statistic, every headline, and every success story lies a chain of decisions, risks, and human ambition. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world.